and to actually engage in our discussion of how biased media is and how media functions and whatnot. Yeah. Well, here's the deal, guys. The way this is going to work is you're going to start the list tonight at home. Okay? You're going to come tomorrow, and when I put my little graphic up there, guess what you're going to do? Add to your list. All right? Because that's what we'll do is we'll talk about some of those graphics. This is not the right slide. There we go. Okay. So, yes, sir.
How many media sources do you use?
There's no number. I mean, guys, how many media sources are you aware of? 2. CNN and Fox News. That's all you know. And no. Social media, not media. Because you can't tell me whether or not Twitter in and of itself has no bias. It's the individuals on Twitter that have bias. Okay, so I'm talking about social media can't count for that reason. Alright? It just can't. Alright, I want what we consider mass media. And understand that a lot of what we're going to go through today, not a lot of, a significant amount of what we're going to go through today is a little outdated. Alright? To give you a little understanding of how dated it is, a decade ago I was in college. I took a political science class in college. We were required, according to the syllabus of this class, we were required to receive the New York Times on a daily basis, read the New York Times, and actually utilize articles from the New York Times in discussions in the classroom. Okay? My assumption is that probably doesn't happen in that class anymore. And if that professor still makes them read the New York Times, they probably do it online rather than be given an actual paper copy of the New York Times. Okay? Newspapers are or have been historically the predominant source of media in America. Obviously, you recognize that they are not anymore, right? I mean, how many of you still have a newspaper delivered to your home every morning? I'm always shocked that the number's that high. How many of those of you that get the newspaper, do you actually read it? Sometimes. Okay. Now listen, as we move away from newspapers, okay, and let me explain to you just how significant newspapers used to be. Okay, in really large cities in America, you actually used to get your newspaper on your front doorstep every morning, right? You would pick the paper up, you would take it to work, right? You would read it on your breaks at work, whatnot. You would get home from work, and there would be another newspaper, the evening edition, sitting on your front step thing, right, at 6 or 7 or whatever. Okay? And then in the evening, you would read the nightly news. Okay? So you didn't just get one newspaper a day, you got 2. Alright, obviously that is not dominant or predominant anymore in our culture or our society. Okay? Newspapers really began dying in earnest about 20 years ago. Okay? And really with the advent of the internet more than anything else. Because if you're going to read, it's just so much easier to find exactly what you want online. You can read the New York Times from anywhere in the world. And that being said, believe it or not, you can actually get the New York Times delivered to your home here in Texas. And it's expensive, but you can get it delivered. Right? They basically just send it to a printer down here. And they print it off and they take it to your house that way. But it gets real, like I said, it gets real expensive at that point. Alright? So when newspapers are replaced, newspapers initially are going to get replaced by television. Television becomes more prominent in the 60s and into the 70s. Alright, historically we know that when television was first created, how many channels were there?
3.
4. There was a 4th one. What are the 3 you're thinking of?
I know there was a
No, CNN's not there.
I know HBO was one of them.
No.
No.
God, no. ABC is the American Broadcasting Company. NBC is the National Broadcasting Company. CBS is like the Central Broadcasting System. Okay? And then there was a fourth one. BBC is British. PBS.
I was right.
PBS, Public Broadcasting. And so those are the big four. Okay, now slightly off topic, but if you want to watch something that's really easy to digest and it's entertaining and it's fun, okay, if you have or your parents have an HBO account, there was a show a handful of years ago that does a really good job of explaining or modeling at least the dichotomy between media and the reception of media, right? Or how media is actually supposed to function. Okay, media will be a linking mechanism between the people and government. The show is called The Newsroom. Now I'm going to go ahead and warn you if you're like Zane, it's written by Aaron Sorkin, who is just a notorious liberal. Okay, so there is a little bit of a liberal bias to it. But it's good, or it's educational from the standpoint that it talks about what news is supposed to sort of be ideally. Okay? Because when you go back and you look historically, and we go back to like CBS, NBC, and ABC as being the only sort of channels that exist. Every night you had this like old white guy like Walter Cronkite who would sit in his like well-tailored suit, right? And he would read the news to you. And it wasn't a conversation. Okay? In fact, the vast majority of the time he sat there in this very monotone sort of voice. Okay? And he basically just informed you. That was the sole purpose of it. Okay? And we'll see what we're talking about is that that's no longer really the case anymore in media. Alright? So additional mass media, you'll see magazines. Again, magazines are kind of going the way of newspapers. They're not, most Americans anymore don't really enjoy or don't need that feel of the paper in their hand, right? Okay. But again, when we talk about magazines, really like Time, Newsweek, U.S. News and World Report, those are your real examples when you talk about media in terms of educational and informative type of media, right? I'm not talking about like the Sports Illustrated swimsuit issue. Nobody cares, all right? Not the purpose of this, okay? Like Guns and Ammo or whatever it is, whatever magazines you get, okay? Not the point. That being said, you can definitely add more to it. Okay? I mean, GQ, Vogue, like magazines like that, they absolutely do have sort of media-based information in them. And one of the things that you'll find with media, and this probably should not shock you, is that there is a trend towards consolidation. There's a lot less competition. In fact, large conglomerates pretty much own all newspapers that are still in existence, right? So independently owned newspapers throughout the United States are incredibly rare anymore. Okay, so that's our sort of historical definition of mass media. Obviously, we know that that has changed. We have a new era of media. Okay? And again, I'm not really talking about social media. That's a whole different beast that we won't cover. Alright? But the internet does count as a new part of mass media because you get largely online publications. You get people that actually seek their news, their knowledge from the internet. Alright? A lot of what you see up there is a little bit skewed to the right. Okay, I mean, Rush Limbaugh, for instance, or Bill O'Reilly, O'Reilly Factor, those are specific examples of sort of conservative right-wing personalities that you see within the media. That doesn't mean that there aren't left-wing personalities as well, right? right? I mean, Anderson Cooper could definitely fall up there in the same examples of new media, and Cooper is definitely on the left side of the spectrum, all right? When you look at the characteristics of new media, right, this is directly in opposition to that old media that we were talking about, where you had somebody like Walter Cronkite with his deep monotone voice telling you exactly what happened in the world that day. Okay? Now you get more sensationalized, editorialized information. And in fact, and I like to use O'Reilly as the example, right? If you ever watch The O'Reilly Factor, which is a program on Fox News, the last like 10 minutes of his show is basically a 10-minute long editorial rant, right, in which he tells you everything that he views as sort of being wrong at that given time. And so it's no longer this objective sort of information that's coming out. Okay? It now is personalized, it's emotional, it's meant to be opinionated, topical, it's meant to not only inform you, and most of them would say that that's their primary purpose, but in reality, it's infotainment, right? It's information that's presented in an entertaining manner, because when we look at all of these news stations, what's their primary purpose? To make money. They're businesses. If CNN ceases to make money, CNN ceases to exist. And now, does the mass media influence public opinion? Not a simple question. In fact, the answer is both yes and no, okay, depending on how you want to look at it. And one, you can make the argument that yes, media does influence public opinion because the manner in which media covers things is different than the way that it used to be, especially when you look at elections, right? So when you looked at the media covering the election in 2016, what did you see?
Arguments for both sides.
Even within the media, did you ever hear a media persona say that, well, Trump just isn't presidential?
One person did.
All kinds of people did. And when I say presidential, that's presidential with the little p, right? The lowercase p, right? Obviously, he is president of the United States. But that presidential with the lowercase p means what? Displaying the characteristics of a stereotypical president. Is Trump presidential now that we're a month into his presidency? No. No, he is not the stereotypical president. Whether you like him or hate him, right? I don't think anybody in America is going to sit here and make the argument that he is a stereotypical president. He's not. Okay? But did we focus on his policies? Did we focus on his ideologies? No. We just sat there and we parroted what Hillary Clinton kept saying, or a large number of media sources did. Well, he doesn't have the right temperament. He doesn't have the right persona. He's not presidential. And these were instances or attacks on him as a human being, him as a person, that had no bearing on any sort of his policies or how he's going to run the country or ultimately what that's going to do for or against the country as a whole. Okay? When you look at the media tends to focus on things for short periods of time. They do not look at the long-term sort of relationships to most things. Okay? Now this occurs for a number of reasons. Okay? One of them being Americans typically have very short attention spans today. Okay? But two, you have to continuously, as a media source, you have to continuously move on to the next biggest thing, because if you don't, you lose your audience, you lose revenue, you're no longer profitable, you shut down. Okay? Another reason why you make the argument that media does influence the public, those people that consume media, you're going to go back and repeat what it is that you heard. Okay? So you're going to parrot that type of information that you've been getting, and that can ultimately help shape public opinion. This, if you ever get this question, because this is like a test question, I'm going to go ahead and tell you right now, this will probably be on your test. Okay? If you get this on the AP test and it asks you how media influences public opinion, this is the absolute best answer because there is no denying it. Okay? Media does influence public opinion because media helps set a national agenda. Alright? So let's think about this for a second. Okay? All of us in this room, we can take something that we feel passionate about. Right? And so let's take something like gun control rights. Okay? Or Second Amendment protections. Most people in America have fairly strong Second Amendment feelings. Right? Whether you are in favor of everybody being able to own as many guns as they want, or you believe that gun ownership should be difficult or non-existent or whatever. Okay? When media continues to focus on killings in Chicago and how over like Labor Day weekend last year somebody was shot in Chicago every 9 minutes, right? And you hear about mass shootings in public schools and things like that. Okay? Does that change your opinion about your guns? It doesn't. Right? Evidence shows that it actually doesn't. In fact, those of you that are in favor of people owning guns, when you hear about all the violence in Chicago, you're like, see, man, if I own guns, that wouldn't be a problem because nobody would try to shoot me. I'd just shoot them back. Right? But if you were opposed to guns, you're like, oh, that's horrific, man. If we just got rid of guns, then we wouldn't have violence in Chicago anymore. Right? If we got rid of guns, nobody would get shot. Right? It doesn't change your opinion, but what does it do? When media continues to cover this stuff, what is media accomplishing? It makes it a part of the national conversation. That sets the agenda. That influences public opinion. Okay? Because it cannot necessarily tell you how you feel about an issue, but media can tell you or can change how important that issue might be at the given time. Okay? So that's how media really can do that. All right? Other ways that it happens, you got the rise of advocacy or adversarial journalism. Okay? This is something that goes into what we call the confirmation bias, and I'll talk about that a couple of times today. How many of us have taken AP Psych? So if you have taken AP Psychology, you should know what the confirmation bias is, yes? We know? Okay? For those of you who do not know what the confirmation bias is, basically the confirmation bias is this, is you have preconceived notions about something. Okay? And what you will do is you will consume things that support the notions that you already have. Okay? So if you believe that Donald Trump is a terrible president, you are going to go out and consume media that says Donald Trump's a terrible president. Okay? If you think he's a great president, you're going to go out and you're going to consume media that says he's a great president. Okay? And that's a lot of what media has become in this day and age. So it's what we call adversarial or advocacy journalism. Okay? So people are now sort of taking an opinion, okay, and they're reinforcing that opinion of the individual, which some people will say helps shape that public opinion. Right? Maybe it strengthens the public opinion for the people that are consuming it, but I don't know that it shapes it. Okay? This probably will not come as a shock to anybody, but studies show that journalists tend to be very liberal. Okay? Again, that should make sense to you. They are going to be college educated. And what is it that journalists study in college? Liberal arts. Right? In order to be a journalist, you're going to need to study history and English and communication and things like that. These are liberal sort of majors. All right? Media is the primary linking institution between the government and the public. And this goes back to that television show, The Newsroom, and the way that that's supposed to work. Because in the newsroom, they actually complain about this last point up here, and that is that everything is now profit-driven. Okay? Because you almost have to be sensationalized and biased in this day and age in order to be successful. All right? Reasons why mass or public opinion is not influenced by the mass media. Okay, so not influenced by the mass media. Number one, most people don't pay attention. Right? How many of you go home and watch the news regularly? Those of you that raised your hand, can you tell me what you saw on the news 3 nights ago? No. Probably not. Okay, there might be an individual story that sticks out to you, but you're going to forget a significant percentage of what it is that you saw. Okay? Simply because we don't necessarily pay attention, right? How many of you, because I'll admit 100% I'm guilty of this. How many of you have ever sat on your couch watching television while playing on your little smartphone or your tablet or whatever? Right? We all do that. Okay, so even though while we're consuming media and I'm watching the news, right, I'm also doing like 3 other things at the same time. And so that decreases or diminishes the influence that media has. And back to the confirmation bias, and I would actually say that this shows that it doesn't, right? We only select media sources that we agree with. Okay, the number one thing that I can advise you as a government teacher is somebody who's very politically aware, and is that I would tell somebody like Zane, you should never ever watch Fox News.
I love Rachel Maddow. She's great.
Is that MSNBC?
Yeah.
Are you being sarcastic?
No, like, I didn't care for Megan, so if I happened to be watching TV, I'd switch over to her and listen to her 20-minute rant at the beginning of her show. It's pretty exciting.
Okay. But I would tell you, you really want to try to consume media that is of the opposite ideology of what you are. Okay? In all honesty, the only way you're ever going to truly be able to defend your ideologies, your points, your understanding, is to know what the counter argument to it is, to understand that counter, and to develop your ideology or your understanding of why you disagree with the counter argument. If you blindly just agree with something, that doesn't do you any good. And so hearing what the opposition actually thinks, that provides you with a depth of knowledge that most Americans don't have about things. Okay? I will say this, in addition to the idea here of selective attention, you have selective perception as well, okay? Which means that media is going to have a little bit less of an influence because ultimately you're going to hear what it is that you want to hear. Right? It's a little personal thing to help you understand this. Has anybody in here ever heard somebody say or been told or told somebody, wow, you really clean up good? Okay? Have you ever heard that compliment? What's that mean, Alex?
You really clean up good means like you look, you're able to make stuff look better.
You look good, right? That's a compliment. You look good. I get that a fair amount in my life. You know what I think it means? You look like a bum 90% of the time. Now, same statement, right? Exact same statement, except based upon my perception, I could either A, take it as a compliment, or B, take it as an insult that you say I look like crap 90% of the time. Okay? Why? Because I don't wear like slacks and a collared shirt? Okay. Alright, but that selective perception, that makes a difference. That matters. Alright, and again, that's a reason why media does not necessarily have the same influence that it used to. Okay? Another reason that media is not necessarily as important when we talk about media in terms of political socialization, is it high on the list? No, not at all. Right? So in terms of helping you develop your political ideologies, your political understandings, media falls very low in terms of how your individual opinion is created. Okay? And then finally, people are going to consume media for a wide variety of reasons. All right? So those varying reasons make a difference as well. We'll run through this quickly because obviously newspapers are not a large factor anymore in terms of media. If you look at it, newspapers are typically very liberal, although the publishers are very conservative. They actually tend, not always, but tend to actually endorse conservative or Republican candidates, right? So to give you an ideology or an understanding of this, there was actually a newspaper in Arizona that for the first time in the 100-plus year history of that newspaper, it endorsed a candidate other than the Republican candidate for President of the United States. Okay? Now that shouldn't surprise you because newspapers are, again, businesses aimed at making money. Okay? So that's what they're out to do. And therefore, you're talking about big business, and big business is run by rich people, and rich people tend to be conservative. Okay? I will tell you this, for the most part, and it's not just true of newspapers, but it's really true of whatever you want. Okay? Most of you are going to claim that the media is against you. Right? Whether you identify as conservative or liberal, you are going to say that the media as a whole is biased in the opposite way. Okay? As far as newspapers go, there's a lack of competition anymore. In fact, large cities in this day and age really have like one newspaper. Alright? So move on to television because television matters a little bit more. Alright? Okay? And this is a little out of date now too, right? Because where do you guys get your information from? The internet. Even if there's like something that was on Fox News that you want to see, okay, you don't watch Fox News. You go to the website and you get the video that way, right? So for the most part, even when you are talking about sort of television sources, you guys, your generation still consumes everything predominantly online. Okay. I will tell you that one of the key impacts of television, and this is something that you specifically saw with President Obama, he was phenomenal at this, is down here at the bottom. Obama routinely bypassed reporters and journalists, and he just made sort of speeches to the American population. Okay? Rather than allowing the press to dictate the conversation where he comes out, they ask questions, he answers, he simply came out, delivered a prepared statement that he read off of the teleprompter, right? And then that was it. We're done. Okay? And he gets to control the conversation that way. Right? I would assume Trump is probably going to try to do the same thing. Okay? Especially when you consider that he basically hates the media as it is. Alright? So this leads to a decline in the press conferences. Okay? It leads to a little bit of a decline in terms of what the role of media is in terms of coverage and the White House and all of that. Okay? I will tell you this is a vocab term, revolving door right here in the middle. You absolutely need to understand this vocab term. Okay? This absolutely will show up on tests. And here's the basic idea of the revolving door. You have people in the public sector who go and take a job in government. Excuse me. Private sector, go and take a job in government, which is the public sector. And your good example right now is a guy named Bannon, right? Steve Bannon. And I refer to Steve Bannon as the Wizard of Oz. Right? He's basically Trump's chief counsel in the White House. What was his job beforehand? Anybody know?
Breitbart, something on it.
He ran Breitbart News, basically. He was like the CEO of Breitbart. If you don't know what Breitbart is it's claimed to be an alt-right news source. Alright? So here is a guy who, as a part of the media, is able to help establish the national agenda and report on things the way he wants. He moves into the White House, not like literally, but I mean job-wise, transitions to part of the White House staff. Right? And now he's basically doing the same thing except for the public sector, for the government. And the revolving door is eventually, because Trump will leave office, right, he'll go back to the private sector. Right? But this ideology exists that no matter where he is, he's basically playing both sides of the fence. Okay? So when he's in the private sector, he's doing things that are beneficial for sort of Republicans and the right-wing movement. Okay? When he's in the government, he's sort of helping out his old news source and trying to ensure that they're a little bit more predominant than other sources. Okay? Would we say that that's probably a fair assessment of what he's doing? Yes, trust me, he's not the only one. Okay? And it's not just media that this happens in. Right? When you look at the revolving door, it happens in other regards as well. George Stephanopoulos, though, is always a good example because Stephanopoulos was actually in the Clinton White House, right? And then he becomes a predominant reporter, I think, for ABC, if I remember correctly, right? Well, at that point, can you trust anything the man says? Or is he just trying to further the Clintons and what the Clinton agenda was? Right? If he had already worked for the Clintons and now he's trying to inform America, is that unbiased in what he's doing? Maybe not. All right? So we could argue that there's a lack of competition within news, within television. That's not really a major issue anymore with the advent of CNN and cable news networks. So aside from the big three, you have Fox, you have Fox News, you have CNN, you have Headline News, you have MSNBC. There are a variety of other news sources that do exist to help limit that impact. All right. Okay, we're going to stop there. That's all I needed to get through today. What we're going to do, and we'll do a little bit more of this tomorrow,